What is your best they don't know I speak their language story? Some Mexican guys were in a restaurant at the next table over from my wife and me. They were talking about how nice her tits were in Spanish. I understood every word. A family of Carabacois tourists, I could tell from the accent, were visiting a museum that I happened to work at. I overheard them quietly complaining that nothing in my territory was available in French. Not untrue. There aren't many French Canadians here. Luckily French is my mother tongue and I was the only one in a staff of 20ish who spoke it. They were very happy that I offered to give a tour in French. Like, unusually happy. I got tipped $40 for a 20-minute tour. I didn't complain. Late to the party, but once when I was younger I went to the park with my sister. We look very white and no one would know both of us to speak Mandarin fluently unless we told them. Some money must have fallen out of my sister's pocket and in Mandarin we hear a mother talking to her daughter and telling her not to let us know we dropped money so that they could pick it up after we left. Both of us turned around straight away and my sister picked up her money while both of us gave them dirty looks and we changed our conversation to Mandarin. The look of horror on both of their faces will forever be burned into my head. Not me, but before I was born my mom and dad went on a double date with her cousin and her boyfriend. The BF had a friend who apparently had a crush on my mom and he tagged along too for some reason. So they're at the restaurant and my mom noticed that my dad is being pretty quiet, which is weird since he is normally very extroverted. The BF and the friend are talking quietly to each other in Spanish. My dad's Puerto Rican but could potentially pass as just a tan white guy or maybe biracial. Anyway, turns out they were talking mad shit about my dad until my dad started talking to one of the busboys in Spanish. Needless to say it was pretty embarrassing for everyone involved and to this day my dad refuses to see that cousin and her now husband lol. A Finnish person I know doesn't look Asian at all but speaks perfect Japanese. Probably like 2 decades ago now. She was traveling on a train in Finland and happened to find herself in the same crowded car with a couple of Japanese men who were just carelessly having quite a rude discussion in their own language. My friend leaned over and said to them in perfect Japanese, "I would keep it down. I don't know if you're aware but most Finns understand Japanese very well." The guys basically went completely red and immediately got off the train on the next stop. I have tons of these since I am the whitest looking Hispanic person in history. I have overheard people saying how ugly a baby is in Spanish, and then I just say something like that is not very nice in Spanish to them and walk away. It's a great feeling seeing their faces. My GF is Finnish. First time I visited Finland, I got very sick and had to visit a doctor before I made it to even see my GF. These 2 Finnish women, probably in their 50s, were complaining about the foreigner getting in before them. I also had an EEA health insurance card, which are free to get if you're a citizen of a participating country, of which the UK, pre-Brexit, currently is. They were saying I should get on a plane and just fuck off back home if I wasn't well. To which I responded, in Finnish, "Would you two shut up? I have a fucking migraine and listening to you hags isn't helping." They looked so mad but so embarrassed at the same time and then sat there with such a sour face that the only way to describe them would be, "Nama kuin Norsen vitu." This story happened in a small town in Texas, which is important because a lot of Texans know Spanish in addition to English. My dad encountered a Mexican lady while driving near town. Her car had a Mexico license plate. She was driving at 10 miles per hour on a 40 mile per hour road, but immediately floored it when my dad attempted to pass her, cutting him off abruptly and almost running him off the road. They both pulled over and she charged over to my dad screaming in pure Spanish. My dad is pretty fluent in Spanish, despite his native language being English, but couldn't completely translate what the lady was saying since she was talking so quickly. However, he was able to pick up how she was calling him a slew of offensive names, which made him angry. He started yelling at her in pure Spanish, which immediately changed her mood from angry to terrified and confused. She never said a word after that and looked like she visibly shrunk. I often wonder what she knew about the state she was in or if she knew people could learn other languages. I live in a Mexican neighborhood, and not a very good one, but rent is a steal so I ain't bitching. One day I got robbed. Fucker didn't get anything but an ass full of dog teeth so I didn't involve the police. A couple of months roll by and I'm outside tending to my fence when some of my neighbors stroll by. They start talking in Spanish with a thick Honduran accent, very noticeable, and he tells his buddy how he busted into that gringo's house, and nothing but an angry Piero and shitty TV was inside. I got up, casually walked over, and told him in Spanish that if he or his buddy ever stepped foot on my property again, a pissed off dog would be the least of his problems. Best I got. In my college's dining hall. Girl. In Chinese. They have papa. Me. In Chinese. Loud gasp. Girl. In Chinese. She understands Chinese. Me. In Chinese. They have papa. Talked to some nice ladies on the bus once in English, and then they turned around and started talking shit about me and my colored hair and nose piercings in Spanish. Typical shit talking on punk looking people. You know, their dad isn't around and they were mistreated as a kid, neglected, and so on. When it was my turn to get off the bus, I nicely turned to them and said, have a great day, it was nice talking to you guys. God bless in perfect Spanish, and they both just looked at me wide-eyed as one of them pushed out you talk Spanish media, and I responded in Spanish once again. Yes, my dad is quite the Spanish speaker. Fucking bitches. Caras de nopal. Had a customer at my register when I was a teen. She spoke Spanish and I just responded in English to finish the transaction. Once it was done, she said, are you ashamed of not knowing Spanish? I'm Hispanic and look like it. See my post history, but I responded no, because my dead parents couldn't teach me. She stayed quiet and left. I'm fluent in Spanish, just didn't want to speak it. I was in Hungary with my dad and siblings, visiting the town where my grandparents used to live before the Red Army came. Some of the town folks were talking shit about us tourists and what they were doing in this small town. Their faces, when my dad explained what we were doing there in perfect Hungarian, were hilarious. It's moreover they don't know my dad speaks their language, as understanding Hungarian is hard enough for me, and I can barely speak a few sentences. I live in Germany and I was at my local supermarket at one time. An British couple was also there. The woman said to her boyfriend, those stupid Germans don't even understand English. Something like that. I heard that. I look at her and said, I understand you guys pretty well. Her boyfriend laughed and we had a little talk. Pretty funny situation. The woman apologized her and I said to them that English is a pretty common language here. In a Mexican taco shop ordering food to go for my family. Lady at the counter, I asked if I wanted salsa. The guy behind me said something about gringos not being able to handle real salsa. I turned and said, mi esposa es mexicana. Hacemos nuestro salsa. My wife is Mexican. We make our salsa. Guy said nothing. As I was leaving, I heard the group he was with laugh. I was at a Mexican restaurant with my boyfriend and his family. The waitress was talking to his parents in Spanish, and since I stood out, she asked if I was their son's girlfriend. She then asked why is it that some Mexicans like to date Asians, as her son was dating an Asian and she couldn't understand the fascination behind it. My boyfriend's parents proceeded to tell her that I know some Spanish and probably understood what she was saying. She got embarrassed and then looked at me and said in Spanish, oh wow, you're very smart. I never went back to that restaurant since then. I am not exactly fluent in Spanish, but I can understand it really well. I was walking past my ex-boyfriend, who was Hispanic, and he had a group of other Hispanics with him. Assuming that because I was white I did not speak Spanish, they started talking crap about me as I walked by. I knew what they were saying. They were not nearly as clever as they thought. Some Ukrainian kids from the nearby private school had no idea I knew they were calling me, among other things, a fat F-word till their last day. When I told them, I wrote this, Nivato tak Gavority, on an index card with the help of another customer who's actually really sweet. All the color drained from their faces, and they said to me, you don't even know what that says, do you? And my spoken response in Ukrainian was, maybe I do. Watch your words, moron. Never have I seen three punk ass kids look so ashamed. I have a German colleague who speaks flawless English after spending part of his youth in the US. I don't look German at all, or Slaughterholt. This gets magnified if I'm with someone and we're speaking American English. Germans automatically assume that anyone not speaking German can't speak or understand it. For sport we used to ride the regional trains on busy days and speak English the entire ride. We looked and probably sounded like clueless Americans. People seated around us would ridicule things that they heard us talking about: TV, music, cars, sports, etc. At each stop more and more passengers would board and join in the secret shaming of the stupid Americans, but in German, so they think we understand none of it. Pretty soon nearly the whole train car is involved, all laughing at us, as the train is about 5 minutes before the final stop, now very slowly rolling into the main station where everybody will disembark. One of us, usually me because it had the biggest effect, would respond with a local idiom, something that you would never learn unless you lived there. I literally heard jaws crack from shock. We'd continue talking in German for another minute, and then bask in the painful 3-minute silence as every passenger tries to recall if they said anything that might get their ass kicked. I wish I had CCTV footage of one of those lightning fast noiseless emergency evacuations of a packed train car. The first time it happened it was purely accidental. We didn't even realize that we talked in English for most of the trip until we noticed everybody around us talking shit so freely. That time even the train conductor got in on it and used probably one of the most politically incorrect but commonly used racist phrases in German. He was so embarrassed he did what no German does. He apologized. He didn't say sorry. That's often said with disdain because you've asked for something that should be able to fulfill but can't. He said, "Ich bitte vielmals um Versicherung," with head bowed. Translation: I beg many times for forgiveness. A sincere request for forgiveness 10 times as rare as a unicorn that can land a quadruple axel in the Olympics. I've caught Germans outside of Germany talking shit and watched them swallow their tongue as I clap back. ISTS nicht peinlich. Or take a phone call in German, but nothing equaled making a train go silent with one phrase. A rather old story. Japanese tourists at a bar in my town where the owner, her family and most of the bartenders and regulars were my acquaintances. Dudes walked in, ordered their drinks and started talking in Japanese about which of the women at the bar had the best tits, ass, legs, other appendages. The bartenders and most of the patrons that night were female and were laughing said appendages off, because I was running a simultaneous translation of everything these guys said. Eventually the time came for them to pay and leave. One of them had trouble understanding the tab which the bartender gave him. So I turned to face him, told him the tab in Japanese and added, "You have a nice ass too." No idea why they hurried out like that. I was just trying to be nice. D. International student said I was cute right in front of me in Spanish. Little did she know I'm Mexican and Spanish is my first language. Sadly my awkward social skills killed all possibilities. Even sadder, she was really hot. My favorite is a story I heard from a friend's friend. He's a Jewish New Yorker, and his ginger has freckles etc. He was on the subway in NYC when 2 men from the Levant region, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, hopped on and were having a really heated discussion about weapons of mass destruction in Arabic. This must have been after around the time of the Iraqi war. At some point, a very well-endowed woman hops on the train, and one of the men says to his buddy, "Check out her weapons of mass destruction." My friend's friend couldn't help himself and burst out laughing. The guy looks at him, shocked. "You can understand us?" "Yes, but I don't have time to explain as this is my stop." I think it would have been funnier if the woman understood them, LMAO. Not me, but my dad is Malaysian but looked very white, pale and Asian looking in his 30s. He was a civil engineer, head of hydro department, and a good college friend of his was a managing director of a turbine company in Texas, and my dad was personally invited to meet and survey some products at his company there for his upcoming hydro project. My dad, and most Malaysians in general, is very fluent in English. So the first thing my dad and his employees faced when entering the company's lobby was this American lady at the reception. She looked at my dad's complexion and immediately tried to take on a stereotypical Asian accent to attempt to communicate with him. My dad's co-workers behind him were embracing themselves for the inevitable rage at this racist remark. But my dad decided to play along and spoke to her in Asian broken English for about 10 minutes, just to mess with her. He did mention she was pretty condescending to him and his workers, and became increasingly frustrated about holding the conversation. Just when she was reaching her limit, the MD, her boss, came down to the lobby and enthusiastically greeted my dad from afar with "Yozal, you're finally here." My dad dropped the Asian act and returned his greeting out loud in completely fluent English. Confused and embarrassed, she became speechless and her face turned bright red in silence at the situation. The MD invites my dad upstairs to his office for the meeting while my dad's workers were holding in their laughter as they followed him to the lift area. My dad later told his MD friend about the whole situation in the lobby and the MD profusely apologized for her behavior, but my dad was a good sport and had fun messing with her. Later that month, my dad came back for another meeting and found out that the MD took no excuses and fired her that very same week for basically insulting their foreign customers. I was at the water park with my BF and was in line for a water slide. While in line, the kid in front of me dropped his goggles, which I bent to pick up. Suddenly I hear, in Vietnamese, "Oh god, that ass. I'd do her." I turn around to see a group of guys around my age and stare at them. They see my gaze and continue to say things like "wow, hot too" in Vietnamese. My boyfriend also understood them and was getting visibly agitated. I then say loudly to my BF, "In Viet, this line is taking forever. Lucky I have you here or I'd be bored out my mind," and I lean in to kiss him. The look on their faces were priceless. It's also funny because I look Vietnamese, so the fact they assume I didn't know the language was shocking to me. Was in a restaurant in Mexico with my parents and my best friend, whom I consider a sister from another mother, and so I call her sis. Well, this couple come in and sit in the table next to us. A young woman and a young man. They seemed to be in a date. The man spoke in English and so did she. She was so thirsty for him. It was super awkward. More so because he was obviously not into her like at all. My sis and my mom notice this and start talking about it in Spanish, and I am trying to stop them through house stares and kicks under the table. They are being rather rude about how the girl on the other table is being dumb for going after this guy, etc. The guy goes to the loo, and finally they both acknowledge me. I whisper very embarrassed, "You do realize she can understand you both, right?" Mom and sis went red while the girl on the other table stared them furiously.